Shabbat Shalom to everyone. I want to tell you what was going on in the world during November of 1954, 70 years ago. Some of the things I couldn't even figure out what they were talking about. November 2nd, 1954 Pennsylvania gubernatorial election, Democratic State Senator George Leader defeats Republican incumbent Lieutenant Governor Lloyd Wood. Okay, here's something that's really significant. The first Godzilla film is premiered in Tokyo. Approximately 9,610,000 tickets are sold, making it the 8th best attended film in Japan that year. Henri Matisse, the French painter, died that same day. What else? On November 5th, 1954, Japan and Burma sign a peace treaty in Rangoon to end their long extinct state of war. This seems important. The Soviet Air Force MiG-15 fighters shoot down a U.S. Air Force B-29 Superfortress off of Japan, and the Soviet Union claims that the B-29 was a spy plane. Okay. November 10th, 1954, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower dedicates the United States Marine Corps' War Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. In November 11, 1954, Congress announced that Armistice Day was now going to be called Veterans Day. This is fascinating. November 12th, the main immigration port entry in New York Harbor, the Ellis Island, closed permanently. I'm thinking, up until 1954, people came into Ellis Island? I never knew that. What else did I learn here? In November 14th, 1954, Egyptian President Mohammed Naguib is deposed by Gamal Abdel Nasser. Significant event. What else? The November 7th, there's reason behind what I'm doing here, so just relax. November 17th, Yitzhak Lamdin, a very famous Russian-born Israeli poet and columnist, he died. November 19th, I guess, the formal Cold War with North and South Korea and the demilitarized zone, that was established. I'm not sure what that actually means. This is something that blew my mind. What's the Dow Jones Industrial Average at this moment? I know everyone knows these things. I have no idea. But the Dow Jones, how much? 36,000. It's about 36,000. See, you were here for a purpose. This whole sermon would have collapsed if you weren't here. Okay, so the Dow Jones Industrial Average, this is November 23rd. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 3.27 points, or 0.86%, closing at an all-time high of 382. More significant, this is the first time the Dow has surpassed its peak level reached just before Wall Street crash of 1929. Put your money in the stock market. Don't take it out. Okay, so Enrico Fermi died in November 28th, and so on and so forth. Things were happening in 1954 of the year in this month of November. And the reason why I wanted to give you that is that every time someone gets up to speak, a minister or priest, whatever, they're always speaking in the context of the world they're living in. I mean, we are, and even when you're not talking about the world that you're living in, you're talking about the world you're living in, because you can't escape the world. Dr. Norman Lamb was one of the most distinguished Orthodox rabbis of the 20th century. He was, eventually became the chancellor of Yeshiva University and the Rosh Yeshiva, head of their rabbinical school. He died eventually at 92 in 2020 at the age of 92. He had an incredibly distinguished career. He was the first American-born rabbi to lead Yeshiva University because everyone was European. He graduated from Yeshiva College in 1945 with a major in chemistry. He was valedictorian. Upon graduation, Dr. Lamb pursued advanced scientific studies at the Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn. He was ordained as a rabbi in 1951. He got his PhD in Jewish philosophy from Yeshiva University in 1966. He wrote 15 books. He edited 20 volumes of other books. He wrote this book called The Religious Thought of Hasidism, a text and commentary which I have, which got a National Jewish Book Award. He must have not have slept a moment in his life. And he was a pulpit rabbi, and he was a pulpit rabbi for 25 years. He served in the Jewish Center in Manhattan, which is a very distinguished Orthodox synagogue. He was an assistant rabbi at Keilath Jeshurun, and then he was a rabbi in Springfield, Massachusetts. So I got curious. Somehow all of his material, probably anything he ever wrote, became part of, I don't know, an archive at, I think at Yeshiva University. And I found, and I didn't do this because I'm lazy, but as I showed Becky and Nathan, this is Rabbi Lamb's sermon. Literally. This is his, it's not the original, of course, but this is his typed sermon, single space, that he actually typed. And he has his little notes in it. So what I've decided to do is share this with you. And sharing it because it's very good. And it reflects his brilliance, and it has a real good punch at the end of it. But it's based on the main character of our Torah portion, Isaac. In Isaac, just to give you a little bit of background so this makes sense, we know Isaac was the son of Abraham. We know Isaac was brought onto Mount Moriah by Abraham to be sacrificed. He wasn't sacrificed. We know later on that Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have these two sons, Jacob and Esau, and there's trouble between them. And the key issue when it's found in our Torah portion, one of them is, if you remember that Isaac is at the end of his life, and there's a trick that takes place where Rebekah helps Jacob to receive the blessing that Esau should have gotten. So it's all about seeing, okay? That's the background. So can I share this with you? I think it's really interesting. But you got to remember, it's 1954, and he's speaking to an Orthodox synagogue, and he's a young man, and this is his Thanksgiving sermon, okay? So the title of this is Isaac, History's Thanksgiving Sermon. The life of Isaac, inspiring and pathetic in its tragic beauty, stands out as history's sermon to Americans, and especially American Jews in this Thanksgiving season. Tragedy seems to have followed the patriarch to the end. His early life was a glorious episode. As a young man, he accomplished the most glorious feat in Jewish history, his consent to be sacrificed for God when his father Abraham informed him that was God's will. Yeah, Isaac agreed. He didn't fight it. Here was a young man of 30 willing to cut off at such a young age because it was the divine will that it be so. And the fact that God intervened at the last moment and rescinded his command to Abraham makes no difference. The fact is that Abraham finally surrendered his most beloved son. The fact is that Isaac made his decision to give his life. And the fact is that his beloved mother, Sarah, died when she heard the news that Abraham was prepared to offer up her only son. This great episode, known as the Akedah, is a theme we constantly recall in our prayers when we want to advocate the cause of Israel before God and plead for divine mercy. The early part of his life was therefore gallant, glorious, and lofty. Our rabbis, however, with their customary bent for just and unprejudiced appraisals of the heroes of the people, were severely critical of Isaac. And they express this criticism in the form of an imaginary debate between Isaac and Moses. And in this debate, the Midrash quotes Isaac as saying to Moses, "I am greater than you because I was willing to sacrifice my life by being bound on the altar. And thus I saw the divine presence. That is, I attained great religious insight." And then Moses answers, "True, but I'm still greater than you because while you may have seen the Shekhinah, God's presence, you became blind soon afterwards." As we read in this parsha, when Isaac became old, his eyes failed him, whereas I spoke to the Shekhinah, God, panim el panim, face to face, and yet my eyesight's never failed me. So Moses says, I never went blind, you did. He's on to something here, okay? Here is the interesting dialogue, and although we must understand that since several generations separate the two, that the Midrash is not to be taken literally, and also that the argument put into their mouths are not to be taken as typical of their characters, since they certainly were more humble than this. What our rabbis did mean to point out was the great sacrifice and attainment of great vision are terribly important. But the vision must be sustained and the sacrifice repeated if necessary. That the vision must not be followed by failing eyes. That the insight should not be neutralized by blindness. That the moment of greatness should not be followed by everlasting greatness and not by the eternity of darkness. You know, you can't have a glimpse of light of being able to see in life isn't enough. That is a tragedy of Isaac's life. To what great moment he rose when he laid down on the stone altar and calmed his father, directing him in his slaughter. At that moment, as the sages relate, as he was lying bound on the Akedah facing upwards, the very heavens split and Isaac saw the heavenly host and the ministering angels. He saw the Pnei Shekhinah, the face of God. And because of that brilliance of his vision, was blinded. He saw God and went blind. What tragedy, from vision to blindness, and even worse, as he grew older, he became blinder. And is more than physical blindness, for while he remains the great and holy patriarch, one of the three fathers of Israel, he is in old age, fails to discriminate between his good son and evil son, between an Esau and Jacob. And unlike Moses, who sustained his vision throughout his entire life, Isaac's weakens with age and turns blind. And blind to Esau's treachery, blind to Jacob's piety, blind to Rebekah's loyalty. What a pity one was this trek from Akedah to blindness. But let's keep going here because he's getting somewhere. This is just a warm-up act. This then is the intent of the rabbis of the Midrash, history's Thanksgiving sermon expressed in the personality of Isaac. It is not enough to have a vision. One must keep it. It's not sufficient to have made a sacrifice, no matter how great. One must ever be prepared to repeat it. Vision and insight must follow through with eternal clarity. So I say that it is history's Thanksgiving sermon, because now is the time for us Americans, and even more so American Jews, to remember that the splendid visions of freedom and the noble sacrifices for democracy which our country made in its youth, and for which we now thank God, these visions and sacrifices can be lost, denied, and belied in our times by the petty blindness that seems to be afflicting us as we grow older. 70 years ago. Did he write this 70 years ago? Or did he write it yesterday? So let me give you two examples of the great victories won through sacrifice and vision, which are now being lost through blindness that sometimes comes with age. Two great freedoms, which one way or another we are abandoning and allowing to atrophy. Okay, so here are his two concerns about America in 1954. First, there is the precious American freedom, the freedom of speech. The American Revolution was a sacrifice our countries offered for this great freedom for which we are so thankful. It was primarily Thomas Jefferson who had the great vision of completely free and unfettered freedom of expression. It was he who in 1779 insisted that the opinions of men are the objects of civil government, nor under its jurisdiction, are not the objects of civil government, nor under its jurisdictions. Truth is great and will prevail if left to herself. Errors cease to be dangerous when it is permitted freely to contradict them. This vision was 10 years later to become part of the Bill of Rights as the First Amendment. It is one of the finest, noblest thoughts which men could envision and for which they might sacrifice. Allow people to speak. It's not the government's point. If you let people speak, and then the truth will come out. If we had been like Moses, who could keep up a sustained vision, we would have insisted upon the sacred and inviolate character of that right. Instead, we have, with our increasing age, allowed the right of all free men to be gradually curtailed. During World War I, we allowed it to be legislated that to speak out against participation in the war is a crime. And since then, and especially since the Cold War, it has become a crime to advocate certain political thoughts. We are becoming blind, losing that terrific insight of our national youth that truth will prevail if left to herself, and errors will cease to be dangerous if we are free to contradict them. And now, just like this week, we saw what it is one and the same, the most ridiculous, most dangerous of quirks of unintelligent congressmen. Oh, there's always been stupid congressmen. At the same time, that certain national military school forbade its students to debate the question of allowing Red China into the United Nations. A congressman from Virginia, who otherwise has been resting in unfortunate obscurity, threatened students from a private college with turning in their names and statements to the FBI if they dare to take affirmative in this debate. Certainly this is ridiculous, and many good Americans have rightly damned his statement, but it is a terrible symptom of the impending blindness. This season, when we thank God for our freedoms, we have to make up our minds to sustain them in continuing vision of freedom of speech unblurred by nearsighted bigots. Okay, he keeps going. I'm going to keep going, even if you don't want me to. Okay, because I like it. Okay, second, an even more important example is the freedom of religion. I need not recount to you the many sacrifices the Pilgrim Fathers and others, early Americans, had to make in order to assure this great freedom. It was not an easy task because early America was not free from pernicious bigotry. Early American Jews found prejudice in New York and in Massachusetts and other colonies. Freedom of religion was a noble vision, and it was hard won, only with many sacrifices. And yet, this is so relevant, it's kind of scary. Today, we have been somewhat untrue to these sacrifices. We have lost the vision. First, there is the tremendous abuse of this freedom, which includes the proposition that states favor no church or sect against another. Right here in Springfield, he's in Springfield, Massachusetts, and almost all of Massachusetts. I do not want to go into this matter in detail because I'm saving it for another occasion. Rabbis always have other occasions to pontificate. But those parents who have children in the city's public schools are only too well aware of the curtailment of religious freedom in our education system. When Jewish children are forced to participate in reciting a prayer which comes from the Christian Bible, when our children are told that they must sing songs or carols which are most definitely Christian religious hymns, when these and many others such instances are public knowledge, and when these and similar matters are hush-hushed by our Jews because they are afraid to be troublemakers, then I say that our democracy is decrepit with age and dying of blindness. This is so good. If fighting for religious, I wish I could give a sermon like this. If fighting for religious freedom makes one a troublemaker, then I say that it is a mitzvah of the Constitution to be a troublemaker. Being the kind of troublemaker puts one in the same category with Jefferson and Washington, Penn and Franklin, and if we can allow such abominable conditions to be unchecked because of the silly reasons just mentioned or because of a fatalistic is just can't be helped attitude, then we are allowing our eyes to be dimmed and our sacrifice to prove vain. But not only in this way we are losing the beauty of our early American dreams. I think that one of the main abuses of the freedom of religion is allowing religion to fall into disuse. It is worth giving your life so that you can worship the way you want to. And if you don't worship, by not practicing the religion for which you seek freedom, you blind the democratic insight. You make the sacrifice into a forfeiture and the vision into a pipe dream. So in 1954, he was worried people didn't come to synagogue. I don't have to, 70 years later, I'm not doing so poorly. If this Thanksgiving we thank God for the freedom of religion, let us all means go ahead and practice it. Otherwise, there is little to be thankful for. And let me just finish. He quotes Justice Douglas in his book, The Almanac of Liberty. And this is what he writes. He says, the basic premise on which the Declaration of Independence rests is that men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That means that the source of these rights is God, not government. And when the state adopts measures protective of civil liberties, it does not confer rights. It merely confirms rights that belong to man as the Son of God. To secure sometimes means to obtain, sometimes to safeguard. In the Declaration of Independence and the preamble of the Constitution, to secure means to safeguard. The rights and liberties secured were those which American citizens already had. Government merely underwrote them. And then I'm going to read you the last paragraph. We are thankful that God has granted us these rights, and we are thankful that our country guarantees them in appreciation of them. We will determine not to invalidate the sacrifices that demean the visions. As our democracy grows and matures, we shall strive to keep it from blindness. Instead, may it forever be capable of a profound insight and ever-sustaining vision. What a beautiful message. It's such a nice message. That's when rabbis gave sermons.